We're going to be talking in this video about developing deep embodied skills and looking at the right way to do this or the best way to do this. The video is being made in response to a question, and the question is about learning hypnosis skills, but I want to make it absolutely clear that what I'm about to say with regard to the deep learning of skills applies whatever skill set you're looking to develop. Okay? I had an old mentor of mine years ago used to say, give yourself an unfair advantage, develop crazy good skills in whatever areas you think are going to serve you. He was big on developing skills. He called that an unfair advantage. There's a kind of truth to that. So you want to develop skills, you want to develop them deeply, could be in any area. What are they going to be and how are you going to approach doing that? Let's just take a look at this question. Let me open up my machine here. Question runs thus. Hey JT, I'm currently an HPD student. I think this is a clinical hypnotherapy diploma. And I love the profession, but I feel I benefit from learning rapid inductions and perhaps being mentored alongside my learning. Should I stick with what I'm learning, or do you think it's valuable to learn learn other hypnosis forms simultaneously? Hope that makes sense. It most certainly does make sense. And I'm going to say the answer to this question very much depends upon your own kind of personal psychology. And what I'm going to make reference to in answering this is an idea from NLP, specifically one area of NLP called meta programs, that's going to create a useful lens. Now, before we get into this, I just want to say something about meta programs super quickly, because I don't want to get into what they are here, but there's something from NLP, but they are slightly controversial within NLP. Okay, at least one of the co-founders of NLP, the recognized co-founders, John Grinder, is totally dismissive of meta programs, so they don't belong in NLP. So I just want to make that clear right off the bat, where if you're a certain type of geek, controversial terrain. Okay, so what do we want to do? We want to learn a skill, we want to learn it deeply, we want to learn it profoundly, could be any skill. Do we seek out a teacher, a mentor, a way of doing it and go all in? Immerse ourselves, go all in, or do we draw from a variety of different sources? Now, I actually had this conversation about a year ago with somebody in the world of Chinese martial arts, and they were saying that the only way to develop deep, profound skills is to find a true master and basically kowtow to them, go all in with their system. And that's not the way that I've done it. Okay, and I'll admit my biases on this, but it's also, interestingly, his master, the true master that he had kowtowed to and was going all in with, I happen to know for a fact didn't do it that way either. They were an eclectic learner who went to many, many different sources and integrated what they learned from all those areas into their own unique craft. Now, I have a bias towards this latter way of doing things. This is the way that I like to work, maybe partly by necessity because of where I found myself in life. But as you remember having this conversation with my friend James Sakalos, the NLP trainer from Melbourne, Australia, way back, over a decade ago, I think it probably was. It might not have been quite that long ago, but it was many years ago. I had this conversation with him and I said, the honest truth is anybody who has real skills in NLP, they have them because they took charge of their own learning and they're largely self-directed learner, and they will have gone through a lot of trial and error loops, a lot of personal exploration, a lot of practice. And I believe that to be true at the time. And James looked at me kind of with a puzzled look on his face and went, really? Now, I didn't know at the time we were having the conversation, or maybe I did and I hadn't been paying attention, but James learned in a very different way. He did a very, very deep, immersive 5-year apprenticeship with a guy called Roger Dina. So this is how he developed his skills. And he's good, by the way, so no question about that. So there are different ways of doing these things, and different ways are going to work for different people. Question is, what's the right way for you? I think the answer to this is it depends on your personal psychology. And one aspect of your personal psychology in particular, this is this meta program distinction. Are you internally referencing generally or specifically, or externally referencing? Okay, internally referencing versus externally referencing. I want to point out here that it isn't true to say that this person is internally referencing and that person is externally referencing. These things are often context specific, but it's also often true, as the old saying goes, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So people can tend to be cross-contextually more likely to be one way or another. Okay, but what does it mean, internally referencing versus externally referencing? Internally referencing means that you are always evaluating by your own criteria. You are the measurer, the tester, the checker, the one who decides. You check in with yourself, your own criteria. Does this work? Do I think this works? Could this be better? How does this work with that? So you are the validator of your own experience and your own doing and your own life. Externally referencing means that you will look to other sources, authorities outside of yourself, to tell you whether something is right or is wrong. Now, I have a friend of mine in the world of NLP who has been, certainly in the world of NLP, he's very, very good at what he does, but he's been very externally referencing, and I've been encouraging him in other directions because I think that's where his development will be best served next for him. And he's often fond of saying things like, well, if it's good enough for John Grinder, it's good enough for me, right? That's a very externally referencing kind of a statement, right? Which, ironically enough, might not be a statement that's good enough for John Grinder. I don't know, but that would be another line of inquiry. So, look, it's going to depend on how you do things. Now, if you are a very externally referencing person, right, I would absolutely not advocate learning any skill from a variety of different sources. You're likely to just get yourself tangled up and in trouble if you are externally referencing, because what's likely to happen is you'll go, oh, but this person says to do it this way and this person says to do it that way, so how do I know who's right? Right? Who do I ask to find out who's right? Who's got the correct answer? So externally referencing and trying to draw from many, many different sources will likely get a person in trouble. So if somebody's very externally referencing, they're better off going all in with a highly skilled teacher or mentor or whatever and just going, just tell me how I ought to be doing this, right? And absorbing that person's perspective. Later on, they might be able to switch, but even then that could be a problem. Again, going back to martial arts, I remember I had a friend of mine many years ago, this is probably about 15 years ago. He's still a friend, but this conversation happened about 15 years ago. And he'd been learning Wing Chun for years, and he was pretty good. He'd used it. You know, people say Wing Chun is useless, but he'd actually used it. He'd had a fight on a bus. It wasn't that he was out picking fights. He actually stepped in to defend somebody else. And his Wing Chun worked extremely well in that situation. And supposedly the guy was shouting, "Get this Bruce Lee off me." But anyway, aside from that, he spent a long time learning this Wing Chun and he got good. Then he switched to a different teacher who he'd heard about as being really good. And I saw him after a couple of weeks. He'd been with this new teacher and he kind of looked a bit, he was sort of a bit down in the mouth and said, well, I found out that I've been doing it wrong for years, right? That's a very externally referencing thing. I found out I've been doing it wrong because my new teacher says that all that other stuff was not right. Of course, I would say, because I'm more internally referencing, well, it's different. You know, different things are going to have different pros and cons. They're going to emphasize different aspects, different elements. This is why I love to learn from different sources, because then I can go, how does this person's teachings fit with that person's teachings? How do they modify them? How do they nuance them? Where do they contradict? If they contradict, is it really a contradiction? Right? So I love getting multiple descriptions in building my own skill set, but that's because I'm quite an internally referencing kind of person. Okay? So in short, if you think, actually I'm really internally referencing, I am the authority, I'm the final authority in making the decision about how it's going to be for me, you can probably make use of multiple sources. If you are more externally referencing, you're probably better off finding somebody who can teach you what you want to know and going all in with their approach. Okay, so if you like this video, make sure you like the video. If you have any questions, use the comment section below. If you want to hear more about meta programs, if you go, what's that about? You can ask that question below as well. I just want to say right now that the latest episode of Trip and Crow Conversations, that's my podcast with Alex Crow, is now out on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and various other platforms. I'll put a link to the YouTube channel up in a card here, and I'll put a link in the description to the other places. If you want to learn hypnosis from me, you can do so online via my Hypnosis Without Trance online deep apprenticeship. Again, you'll find links in the description, maybe floating up in a box around here somewhere now. And if you want mentoring from me with regard to mind tech, personal mastery, this kind of thing, transforming yourself, becoming the person you want to be to create the life that you want to create, then you'll want to check out the Nexus program. Okay, that's a subscription-based monthly program. You get mentoring from me, you get exposure to me 3 times a month. You get to ask your questions, and we explore some really cool mind tech. Okay, so thanks for watching to the end, and I look forward to when we next connect.